This has been the device that I have been waiting for a while now, and ANBERNIC, out of all companies, have managed to just chuck it out into the wild and see if it sticks. Because most of their handhelds this year have not stuck, but this one here has for a few reasons. It's called the ANBERNIC RG35XXSP. I don't know why they named them like this still. It's really annoying. And you know, if someone came up to you at the airport and go, "Hey buddy, what are you playing on?" The ANBERNIC RG35X, they're gonna think I've had a fit. Name it something smart, like the Micro Flip, like all the other companies, please. What I like about this is that it can emulate everything up to and including N64 and Dreamcast games. But the best reason is that ANBERNIC have priced it at just $65, which I think is an absolute steal. It's definitely not perfect, and I'm going to share with you a few reasons why, but overall it's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give one away to you guys. I've got two here. I've got the grey DMG version and the transparent blue, which has a custom back shell. I'm going to give one away. So all you need to do is subscribe, like, and comment, and I will pick a winner from the comment section in 2 weeks and DM you. That's all you got to do. Let's jump into the review. In terms of specs, it has the all-winner H700 1.5 GHz CPU, a Mali G31 GPU, 1 GB of RAM, a 3.5-inch IPS display with a resolution of 640 by 480, 3300 mAh of battery, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, which again, ain't bad for 60 bucks. This resembles the Game Boy Advance SP in many ways, and if you compare the size and the buttons, it's close to identical, although it is slightly bigger in both thickness and weight. The shell is made with a high quality plastic that makes the handheld feel sturdy. The hinge itself is notably strong, much stronger than the Go Retroid Flip's hinge, which actually bent with light force. I'm comfortable that the hinge on here will stand up to most casual use, because the hinge actually goes back and rests on the back of the shell or the bottom compartment, rather than it having like pressure points that stop it, which can be easily bent or snapped. The clamshell also shuts to a close with some small magnets too, and when in game it will actually put the handheld to sleep, which is quite a useful feature. But after testing it, I did notice it only seems to wake when you open it up quickly. When doing it slowly, it seems to still think it's shut. So I found myself having to shut it and open it up quickly to get it to wake at times. I think it reads the current through the magnets, which explains why, if done slowly, it just doesn't think you've opened it. Around the sides you'll find your SD card slots, a headphone jack which is perfectly placed, an on-off button, a reset button, battery LED indicators which are similar to the SPs, and volume buttons. There's also the USB-C port and a mini HDMI out port. This HDMI port does in fact work, and because this has Bluetooth capabilities, it was quite simple to hook it up to my display, sync up a controller, and play my retro games on a larger TV. I know this isn't the way that many of you will play, but it does in fact work, and the Bluetooth syncs up quite nicely if you are patient with it. You just gotta wait around for like 15-20 seconds for the XXSP to realize that you want to sync something to it. On the back you will find the itty bitty shoulder buttons, which again resemble the SPs. They're comfortable and are nicely located, even if they do make a lot of noise when rattling the device. I did find myself having some small issues with the R2 and L2 buttons. To get them to send a signal, I had to press them quite firmly. Unnaturally firmly in fact, and when I jumped into the settings, it confirmed my findings and wouldn't hit the contacts when pressed lightly. It's not the biggest issue in the world, as I rarely use these buttons with the games I play on here, but it's still an issue nonetheless and should have been seen through quality checks. Opening the device up, you'll be greeted with the beautiful 3.5-inch IPS display that has a resolution of 640 by 480. This screen has a wide range of brightness and great viewing angles too. It's a common display for ANBERNIC devices, but nonetheless a great one with very little complaints and very little bezels for that matter. If you manage to go for a transparent version of this handheld, you can actually take off the back shell of the screen to add your own subtle graphics behind the shell. It's pretty easy to do, and I added a small Retro Dodo sticker to mine to jazz it up a little bit. I just think maybe someone was just like, you know what, we can actually stick something behind there. Why not make that a feature? Put that on the specs. Somebody put that on the specs that it's customizable, please. The D-pad has tried to stay as close to the GBA SP as possible, and although it's pretty good, has nice travel to it and feels sturdy, I do miss ANBERNIC's classic chunky D-pad, but I completely understand why they did this. The action buttons are high quality, sit quite high out of the shell and have a medium amount of travel to them. Impact is soft, responsive and greeted with a light click. They're superb and I am happy they didn't choose the glossy buttons because, as mentioned, I'm a sweaty nerd and I got thumbs and fingers like Shrek. When you turn on the device, you'll be greeted with ANBERNIC's very basic OS. They're starting to make minor changes on this with every new handheld, so it's good to see them move in the right direction. It's super simple to understand and your games will feature nice artwork above their names, alongside quick access to the settings should you want to connect up anything, save, load, all of those shenanigans. The only minor issue I had was the fact that it's pretty bland, and I did notice there were very little big Nintendo games on here. I couldn't find very many Pokemon games, Zelda games, or Super Mario games, which is the first time I've seen that happen in an ANBERNIC product, which makes me believe ANBERNIC might be getting a little worried about how aggressive Nintendo are being with their legal department. Once you finally find your games, emulation can be quite varied across multiple platforms. For example, your NES, SNES, and Mega Drive games work incredibly well on here, as they should. I then tested Game Boy Color, and to my surprise, it barely worked. The overlay was somehow causing it a lot of issues. It's then that I realized that I wasn't in RetroArch. Instead, the issues occurred when I was in the games room part of the OS that didn't operate through RetroArch. And actually, through my very testing, emulation through the game room was absolutely awful. And if I had to review this handheld based on that performance through games room, it would have been a far different review and a pretty poor product in all honesty. So to get better emulation and all of the fancy borders around your games, I advise using RetroArch purely for playing your games. I ran into very little issues when doing so, and it's a far better and more fluid experience. I do believe newcomers will get confused with this, as the games room is the first tab that users would press, and because this is in the gift buying price range, I would worry that if I was buying it for a friend who isn't a gamer, they would simply click on Games Room, go into their emulation and play their games. But with that comes a lot of issues. So having to ring them up and be like, hey mate, go into RetroArch, make sure frame skip is on, make sure the resolution's right. It's just not right. And ANBERNIC should have seen this through their quality control. Well, you know what? I don't actually think they have a quality control team, because that was such an easy thing to kind of find in terms of issues that it should have been noticed. Definitely would have been noticed before being launched. Game Boy Advance though is an absolute pleasure to play on. It adds a nice Game Boy Advance border to make things look a little more official, and the screen is even better than my modded Game Boy Advance SP, which is unfortunately now becoming a little redundant to use because of this device. Games that use a 4:3 screen ratio are the ones that I tend to flock to on here. And yes, the 3.5-inch display is a little small for N64 and Dreamcast emulation, but it handles these games very, very well. So for those of you that want larger consoles, this will likely meet your needs. I had fun playing Wave Racer and the fast-paced Crazy Taxi games on here, even if it did require me to jump into the settings and change the mappings of the keys because there is a lack of analog stick, which they wouldn't have been able to fit on here unless it was recessed into the shell, and then it doesn't really look like a Game Boy Advance SP. I found myself personally playing a lot of Game Boy Advance games, PlayStation 1 games, and the odd Dreamcast game. I love the form factor, the fact it can fit in my pocket, and the choice of screen is great. The sleep-wake function upon opening the device, when it wants to work, is also a useful feature, but it is a little bit hit and miss. I would say 80% of the time it does work, and then you get the odd time where it just doesn't think you've opened it, or it does think you've opened it and the screen just stays on but not the buttons. Like the buttons just don't want to work, which is a little bit annoying. All of that rounded in a pretty good performing device with battery life that can last up to 7.5 hours and loudspeakers is why I find myself picking this when I go out on occasion. I'm impressed with how ANBERNIC has handled their first clamshell device. It's truly a great device that I think will please many retro gamers who buy one, but there are minor bugs scattered across my experience that cannot go unnoticed. All of these things could have easily been seen in quality control, but ANBERNIC launched it out of the door anyway, likely so that they can have more time spent on launching their next product, which is probably coming out in a few weeks. So I would have liked to see ANBERNIC just spend a little more time on this, actually take quality control seriously, maybe even send it out to reviewers far earlier than the pre-release so that we can give them advice on this kind of stuff, because the issue I have is that this is a close to flawless device and they've priced it very, very competitively, but those small minor bugs make this from, you know, it's basically stopping me from giving it a 10 out of 10 score. So that's where ANBERNIC need to focus on, their small quality control issues, which are scattered across all of their handhelds recently, which is a little bit annoying. So that said, it is highly recommended and no doubt it will be featured in my best retro handhelds of the year video coming out at the end of the year. It's a great device. They've done a lot of good work here. It's just, it needs a little bit of you know, tinkering and a couple of the bugs being removed. So there are links below should you want to buy it, and I will be giving one away, so make sure to subscribe and comment. If not, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.